Genshin Impact is a wondrous game, with an ever-growing world and stylish art design. It's able to capture the imagination of players. Whether you enjoy the world, story, or gameplay, one aspect that keeps players coming back are the amazing characters. So I'm Darcblade with a character guide to Nahida in Genshin Impact. In this guide we will briefly cover the basic lore of the character, their moves, abilities, weapon options, stat priorities and artifact builds. Remember though that these guides are aimed at free-to-play and low-spender players, so the guides will feature the characters as if they were Constellation level 0, with 4-star weaponry, with maybe a few exceptions here and there. But how do you get Nahida? Well, she is a 5-star Dendro character who wields a catalyst, and can only be obtained currently through limited time banners. Nahida, also known as Lesser Lord Kusanali, is the current Dendro Archon of Sumeru, but lives in the shadow of the former Dendro Archon, Greater Lord Rukkhadevata. When Nahida was born, she was taken away by the sages of Sumeru to the sanctuary of Surastana. Here in the sanctuary, she is protected, but some would call her caged, and she was only able to see the world in her dreams. As a result, Nahida was not really known by the people of Sumeru. Yes, they knew of her, of course, but they didn't really know her, as she was hidden away from them. Thus, Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, the previous Dendro Archon, was remembered more fondly. But during her confinement, shall we say, Nahida was able to view the world through the Akasha that the people of Sumeru use. Through this, her knowledge grew, and she truly became a god of wisdom. This was all until the Traveller came onto the scene, seeking Lesser Lord Kusanali's help in their search for their sibling, to which Nahida was more than willing to help, especially after the Traveller helped save the nation of Sumeru. Nahida's personality is friendly and curious, always willing to know more despite her vast knowledge. She wants to experience things firsthand. She seems to value friendship, whether that's with humans, animals, and now wants to experience life firsthand. Now every character in Genshin Impact has access to various talents. These are divided into passive talents and combat talents. Combat talents are moves and abilities that you use in a fight, while passive talents are mechanics that work in the background of a character. When it comes to Nahida, her first combat talent is normal attack, Akara. Pressing the attack button will allow Nahida to perform 4 attacks that deal dendro damage to opponents. Alternatively, you can hold down the attack button, to which you'll consume a small amount of stamina to deal AoE dendro damage to opponents in front of her. Finally, she also has access to a plunging attack, which you perform by pressing the attack button whilst in mid-air, to which Nahida will turn into a ball of dendro power, plummeting towards the ground, damaging all opponents in an AoE around her, dealing dendro damage. Her next combat talent, an elemental skill, is known as All Schemes to Know. This works in 2 ways. You can either tap the ability or hold it. Tapping the ability will send forth a karmic bond of wood and tree from Nahida's side, dealing AoE dendro damage to opponents in front of her, also marking them. This mark is known as the Seed of Skandha, which we'll talk about in a moment. Alternatively, you can hold down the elemental skill button, to which Nahida will enter aiming mode, which allows you to manually mark a limited amount of opponents within a limited area. During this time, Nahida's resistance to interruption will be increased. When released, the skill deals dendro damage to the opponents who have been marked. Aiming mode will last for up to 5 seconds, and a maximum of 8 opponents can be marked by the Seed of Skandha. Now what does the Seed of Skandha do? Well, opponents who have been marked will be linked together. This does have a certain limitation when it comes to distance, but you'll be able to tell when an opponent is marked by the green icon on the opponent. You'll also see a green floral chain that links the various opponents together. Now, after you trigger an elemental reaction on opponents who are affected by the Seed of Skandha, or when they take damage from the dendro cores, including Burgeon or Hyperbloom damage, Nahida will unleash Tri-Karma Purification on those opponents who are all connected together, dealing dendro damage based on her attack and elemental mastery. You can trigger at most 1 Tri-Karma Purification within a short time period, which I believe is 2.5 seconds by default. Now this doesn't mean that the elemental reaction is transferred to all opponents, it just means that all opponents who are linked and marked will take an additional hard-hitting dendro attack when an elemental reaction occurs. It should be noted as well that the Seed of Skandha will reprime opponents for dendro reactions, so you don't always have to manually prime opponents with Nahida's abilities. Anyway, her next combat talent is the Illusory Heart, which is her elemental burst. When activated, Nahida manifests the Court of Dreams and expands the Shrine of Maya. When the Shrine of Maya field is unleashed, following effects will be separately unleashed based on the elemental types present within your party. For example, when there is a Pyro member in your party, while Nahida remains in the Shrine of Maya, the damage dealt by Tri-Karma Purification from the All Schemes to Know, your elemental skill, the damage is increased. When there is an Electro party member in your team, while Nahida remains in the Shrine of Maya, the intervals between the Tri-Karma Purification attacks is decreased. And then finally, when there is a Hydro member within the party, the Shrine of Maya's duration is increased overall. This effect can be increased even further when there are at least 2 party members of the aforementioned elemental types present within the field when it is deployed. So when there are 2 Pyro members, the damage from Tri-Karma Purification is increased even further. When there's 2 Electro characters, the intervals between the Tri-Karma Purification attacks is decreased even further, and when there are 2 Hydro members, the Shrine of Maya's duration is increased even further. Finally, when the Shrine of Maya is active, even if Nahida is not on the field, these bonuses will still take effect so long as party members stay within the actual shrine itself. But anyway, let's move on to the passive talents. First up is Compassion Illuminated. When unleashing the Illusionary Heart, your elemental burst, the Shrine of Maya will gain following effects. The elemental mastery of the active characters within the field will be increased by 25% of the elemental mastery rating of the party member with the highest elemental mastery. You can gain a maximum of 250 bonus elemental mastery in this manner. Next up is Awakened Elucidated. Now, for each point of Nahida's elemental mastery beyond 200, this will grant her a bonus 0.1 damage increase and a 0.03 critical rate to her Tri-Karma Purification attacks from her elemental skill. A maximum of 80% bonus damage and 24% crit rate can be gained in this manner. And then finally is on All Things Meditated. This allows Nahida to use the All Schemes to Know aim mode to interact with some harvestable items within its AoE. So this allows her to basically harvest certain flowers and other materials by simply aiming at them with your elemental skill, making farming incredibly easy with the Dendro Archon. But anyway, let's move away from talents and quickly briefly go over the constellations. Now remember that these guides are aimed at constellation level 0 characters, especially when it comes to the builds. But if you are lucky enough to get some constellations for Nahida, there are a few that stand out. These are constellations levels 1, 2, 4 and 6. Constellation level 1, the Seed of Stored Knowledge. Basically, when the Shrine of Maya is unleashed and the elemental types of the party members are being tabulated, the count will add 1 number to the number of Pyro, Electro and Hydro characters respectively. So you only have to have 1 Pyro, Electro and Hydro character in your party to get the full effects of the Shrine of Maya. Next up is Constellation Level 2, the Roots of All Fullness. Opponents that are marked by the Seed of Skandha will be affected by the following effects. Burning, Bloom, Hyper Bloom and Burgeon reaction damage they will receive can score critical hits. The crit rate and crit damage are fixed at 20% and 100% respectively. And finally, within 8 seconds of being affected by Quicken, Aggravate or Spread, the defense of opponents is decreased by 30%. A great constellation if you like to use Nahida as a main DPS. Next up is Constellation Level 4, the Stem of Manifest Influence. When 1, 2, 3, 4 or more opponents are affected by All Schemes to Know Seed of Skandha, Nahida's elemental mastery will be increased by either 100, 120, 140 or 160. And then finally is Constellation Level 6, the Fruit of Reason's Accumulation. When Nahida hits an opponent affected by All Schemes to Know's Seed of Skandha with her normal or charged attacks after the Illusionary Heart, her elemental burst is active, she will use Tri-Karma Purification, Karmic Oblivion on this opponent and all connected opponents, dealing Dendro damage based on 200% of Nahida's attack and 400% of her elemental mastery, which results in a massive hit on opponents. Damage dealt by the Tri-Karma Purification's Karmic Oblivion is considered elemental skill damage and can be triggered once every 0.2 seconds. This effect can last up to 10 seconds and will be removed after Nahida has unleashed 6 instances of the Tri-Karma Purification's Karmic Oblivion. So those are all the constellations. Let's move on to the next section where we talk about the various builds that I like to use for Nahida. Now Nahida can be used in one of 2 ways, either as a main DPS or sub DPS. She has excellent main DPS capabilities, but is also great at providing off-field damage and support. But regardless of how you like to use her, the builds I use are pretty much the same regardless of the role. So the main build I like to use for Nahida is referred to as the Deepwood Memories build, like I said, this is a build that can be used whether you like to use her as a main DPS or sub DPS. Now, when it comes to the weapons, of course 5-star weaponry is going to be the absolute optimal when it comes to Nahida and this build, but when it comes to 4-star weapons, you have a few options. First of all are the Elemental Mastery weapons, which includes the Mappa Mare or the Sacrificial Fragments. The Mappa Mare gives us an Elemental Mastery bonus, and when we trigger an Elemental reaction, we'll gain bonus elemental damage, which can stack up to 2 times. The Sacrificial Fragments, on the other hand, gives us a larger Elemental Mastery boost, and gives us the Composed bonus, which after damaging an opponent, there's a chance that our elemental skill will immediately come off cooldown. There are a few alternatives as well, for example the Solar Pearl, which gives us bonus crit rate, and gives us the Solar Shrine bonus, which normal attacks increase the elemental skill and elemental burst damage, and vice versa. This is a good one if you like to use her as a main DPS. Although out of the 4-star weapons, one of the best is the Witsith, which gives us bonus critical damage and gives us the debut bonus, which when the character takes the field, will gain a random theme song that gives a random buff for 10 seconds. This can either increase her attack by up to 120%, her elemental damage by 96%, or her elemental mastery by 480%. Finally, there is one more weapon for the free-to-play options that should not be overlooked, which is the Magic Guide, which is a 3-star weapon and still one of the best for Nahida, which gives us bonus elemental mastery and gives us the Bane of Storm and Tides bonus, which increases damage against opponents who are affected by Hydro and Electro by 24%. And when it comes to Nahida, having Hydro and Electro characters in your party is definitely advisable, making this one of the strongest weapons for her. Now when it comes to the artifacts, now this build is called the Deepwood Memories build, so you want to go for 4 pieces of the Deepwood Memories artifact set. For wearing 2 pieces of the Deepwood Memories artifact set, you'll gain a bonus 15% Dendro damage bonus. And for wearing 4 pieces, after an elemental skill or burst hits an opponent, the target's Dendro resistances will be decreased by 30% for 8 seconds. This effect can be triggered even if the equipping character is not on the field. 2 straightforward buffs that allow Nahida to deal even more damage. But as for the stats on them, well, when it comes to the Asans, I'd recommend going for either Elemental Mastery or Attack Percentage. When it comes to your Goblet, you want to go for Dendro damage bonus. Alternatively, you can also go for Elemental Mastery again here if you want to, or even Attack Percentage, but Dendro damage bonus is what I would personally recommend. And then when it comes to your Circlet, you want to go for Crit Rate or Crit Damage, with Elemental Mastery being a backup option. As for the substats, I'd recommend going for Crit Rate and Crit Damage first, followed by Elemental Mastery, then Attack Percentage. The rest are not as important as those stats. Now when it comes to the talents, I'd recommend leveling up all schemes to know first, followed by the Illusionary Heart, so your elemental skill, then your elemental burst, and then your normal attacks. However, if you're using Nahida as a main DPS, you should not ignore her normal attacks as well. But regardless, this is a straightforward build that enhances Nahida's capabilities at dealing damage, whether she's your main DPS or sub DPS. Of course there are a few other options, especially if you don't have access to the Deepwood Memories artifact sets. Some backup options would be the Gilded Dreams artifact set, going for the 4 pieces. This is definitely okay if you like to use Nahida as more of a main DPS. This is because this artifact set specializes in elemental mastery, and you could also consider going for the Wanderer's Troop as well, which is an easy set to get that increases our elemental mastery and the charge damage of characters who use catalysts or bows. But for me personally, when it comes to the builds, the Deepwood Memories is probably the most optimal when it comes to Nahida. But of course, every character in Genshin Impact comes with various pros and cons. No character is absolutely perfect, although Nahida is close. The biggest pro for Nahida is her Dendro damage output. Whether you're using her as a main DPS or a sub DPS, she can inflict tons of Dendro damage very quickly to numerous opponents. On top of that, her next pro is that she can easily prime opponents for Dendro reactions. This is not only thanks to her elemental skill being on quick cooldown, her Seed of Skanta reapplying the Dendro primer, and the fact that she is a catalyst user and can prime opponents through her normal attacks. And then finally, when it comes to the pros, is that she is incredibly useful when it comes to farming. When you're collecting certain harvestables, using the All Schemes to Know aim mode, you can quickly gather materials from afar, making her incredibly efficient when it comes to gathering despite her small size. But of course there are cons. One of the biggest cons for Nahida is, unfortunately, some of her moves and abilities could be seen as complex. This could confuse or scare beginner players, but once you understand them, it's not too much of an issue. And the other con is, unfortunately, she is a little bit fragile. Thanks to her small size, she has a smaller health pool than normal, especially when you're building her for elemental mastery, attack, crit rate and crit damage. But of course, every character in Genshin Impact is made better and enhanced when in the right party. Nahida is one of those characters that encourages you to use different elements in your party. Her elemental burst, the illusionary heart and the Shrine of Maya definitely benefits from having electro, hydro and pyro characters in your team. However, I personally find that electro and hydro characters work best with her thanks to the elemental reactions that you can create with those characters. Nonetheless, this means that Nahida works well with the majority of the characters in the game and can be slotted into pretty much any team. Whilst there is a few limitations, for example she doesn't work too well with Geo, Animo and Cryo characters, there are exceptions, but for the most part I'd recommend Electro characters followed by Hydro characters and then finally Pyro characters when you're building teams with Nahida. Overall though, Nahida, Bua, Lesser Lord Kusanali, the Dendro Archon of Sumeru, she is a fantastic character in Genshin Impact. She is likeable and on top of that, she's incredibly powerful. Her moves and her abilities make her currently the best Dendro character in the game, whether you want to use her as a main DPS or sub DPS. So if you're looking for a Dendro character to add to your party and retinue of characters, I'd strongly recommend Nahida. So there we have it, that is my character guide and overview to Nahida in Genshin Impact. Now remember, there are multiple ways to play characters and use them in the game, which is one of the many aspects that makes Genshin Impact so enjoyable for me. So at the end of the day, use the characters how you want to use them. These builds and guides are how I personally like to use the characters, and I just hope they help you out in your adventures. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a character guide to Nahida in Genshin Impact. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.